Hi everyone, welcome to 5 Code Shakespeare Hamlet Theme Analysis. In this series we look at a total of 14 different themes, and in this video we'll look at 5 different aspects of existentialism: thrownness, alienation, absurdity, nihilism, and radical freedom. What I do in each video is first identify the important aspects of the theme and apply them to the play, and then we dig deeply into the text of each play and pull out several quotes that prove the connection. If you find these videos useful, please like and subscribe, and if you make a donation you get a complete set of the PDFs I use in this series. See the description for details. Hamlet, of course, is not technically an existential work. It was written a couple hundred years before existentialism was quote-unquote invented. Where it emerged from is the need to explain our place in the universe given the new scientific knowledge that we had been gaining since the Renaissance. So as science progressed, the need to explain the universe and our place in it without rational scientific evidence diminished. We used to rely on religions to explain who we are and our place in the universe. And it was very, very, very comforting. By the mid to late 1800s, Christianity had begun to lose its power to provide comfort, certainty, purpose, meaning, and moral guidance. There was a major, major crisis. And I think one of the most sensitive renderings of that crisis was in Dover Beach by Matthew Arnold in the mid to late 1800s. Listen to this. He says, "The sea of faith," that's religion, "was once too at the full, and it was like a girdle around earth, and it was very protective and comforting, lay like the folds of a bright girdle furled. But what's going on now I only hear its religion's melancholy long withdrawing roar, retreating. Religion is retreating to the breath of the night wind, down the vast edges drear and naked shingles of the world," the naked beaches of the world. Now look at those words. The vast edges drear and the naked beaches of the world. Do you see? The cosmos has been emptied of all of its comfort. And so where do we find meaning? Where do we find purpose and then comfort? Well, Matthew Arnold has an answer for it, and it's love, and that's Shakespeare's as well. Okay, so that was around the mid to late 1800s when that really started to kick off with Nietzsche's Death of God. But for hundreds and thousands of years before that, human beings still had been wrestling with these particular questions, the questions of our place in the universe. So existential angst, that anxiety that comes from the empty cosmos, existential angst and the questioning of our place in the universe is much, much older than Nietzsche's Death of God in the mid-1800s. Many of the thoughts, fears, anxieties central to existentialism had been explored in literature for thousands of years before that. Shakespeare, now, where does Shakespeare lie in all of this? Without explicitly denying the existence of God, he doesn't. He never really does. But Shakespeare does wrestle with many of the same doubts and themes, which has led some scholars to suggest that perhaps he was an atheist, because atheism was a thing back in those days, but it wasn't a very common thing. I don't think he was, but those doubts nag on everybody, even if you do have religions, a religion to provide comfort. Those questions are unavoidable at some. The myth of Sisyphus was an old Greco-Roman myth whereby a titan was punished by the gods for hubris and thrown into Tartarus, and for eternity he had to roll a rock up the hill, and once it got to the top of the hill it would roll back down again. Now that myth became a touchstone for the mid-20th century existentialists. Albert Camus wrote an essay called The Myth of Sisyphus, and in it he described how, yeah, this is life, basically. If there is no God in heaven that specifically made us for a specific purpose, all of our efforts and our struggles, like me struggling here to produce this video and you struggling to understand Hamlet, why are we bothering doing this if when we wake up in the morning, we've got to just do more struggle, and then at the end of it all, we just end up dying anyway. So what's the point of it? The question that they asked was, Camus said that, yes, this is life. It is our condition. It is our thrownness to be thrown into this situation. But it's very empowering in the sense that we have the decision on how to approach it. We have to make a decision, a conscious choice to approach it in one way or another. So absurdity. Life is absurd. This is absurd. There's no reason to do it because there is no God. We are just thrown into this universe. Emptied of God, the universe is indifferent at best and hostile at worst. Life is ultimately meaningless. Now, this is where it gets depressing. Life is ultimately meaningless. Life is some kind of mistake. Now, Schopenhauer was one of the great pessimists of the existential movement. Existentialism wasn't quite a movement. It was just a ragtag collection of ideas that kind of cluster around these notions that we're talking about and more. So, if life is some kind of mistake, maybe the universe shouldn't have any life. Now, I think that's juvenile. I think that's really, really adolescent and stupid because, for reasons we'll talk about today, all of our struggles and suffering are pointless. It's all pointless. That's the terror, that the sense that may be true is what terrorizes us, and it terrorizes Hamlet for sure. And in Waiting for Godot here, we got this is the saddest line I've ever heard in my entire life, and it's got a Shakespearean ring to it. The cadence, listen to the cadence of this line. It's got a beauty. It could be cribbed right from Macbeth. Listen to this. Women give birth astride the grave. The light gleams an instant, then it's gone once more. Straight out of Shakespeare. That's Samuel Beckett. Very, very sad. And in the back of our minds, even if we have a religion, in the back of our minds, we have this sense that, yeah, women give birth astride the grave. The baby is born. And if you just condense time, if you telescope time, then it's born, die, born, die, born, die, born, die. What's the point? The Sisyphean question, do you see? It's very, very sad, and we're talking about the sad aspect of it here, and there may be an element of truth to it. But what the existentialist said is that, okay, yeah, fine. This is true. This is our thrownness, and we don't have a God to rely on to say that there is a meaning to it. There is no meaning to it. You have to create your own meaning, and that's the great power of the existential movement. It is in the end, it is positive. And none of these guys committed suicide. None of them. So they aren't despairing. And he doesn't really believe this. They don't really believe what they say. Do you see? I'm half kidding here, but it's true. The fact that none of these guys, Schopenhauer, the most depressing of them all, didn't commit suicide, which means that he doesn't believe the nonsense that he's spewing here. If life is a kind of mistake, then go ahead, kill yourself. Do you see? He doesn't believe it, so don't you believe it, ladies and gentlemen. And if you do commit suicide, you'll miss all of the comedy that's inherent in this absurdity as well. And Shakespeare was a great comic absurdist as well. So Shakespeare directly presents two aspects of this fundamental principle of 20. Yes, this notion became the tragedy and the comedy, the comedic aspects of it became a central part of mid-20th century existentialism. So first I'll find some evidence here for life as absurd tragedy, which is what we just talked about from Waiting for Godot. So there's lots of it in Hamlet, and there's lots of it generally in Shakespeare as well. King Lear, one of the most despairing. King Lear perhaps comes the closest to this. Macbeth comes close to this too, but Macbeth's answer is that, in Macbeth, the answer is that he gave up love. Macbeth abandoned love, and therefore he made this world that wasteland, you see. Anyway, back to Hamlet. Here, Hamlet, the great question, for who would bear the whips and scorns of time? To be or not to be? Why don't we just kill ourselves? That's the great question. That's the Waiting for Godot, Samuel Beckett question. Why don't we just kill ourselves? For who would bear the whips and scorns of time? Who would burdens bear? Who would fardels bear? To grunt and sweat under a weary life, who would do this except that the dread of something after death puzzles the will? So he's got God to tell him that you can't kill yourself. So he's stuck with this existence. He would like to kill himself, but he can't. So Shakespeare, not quite the existential proper thinker, do you see what I'm saying? Puzzles the will. But do you see, even in here, there is the suggestion that what if there is, the question that we ask here is, well, what if there is no God? Kind of echoing in the back of a Christian's mind or a religious thinker's mind, do you see? There's even that question that you have to wrestle with. What if there is no afterlife? Now here, of course, this is that famous scene. Alas, poor Yorick, here's the angst. He sees the skull of his childhood friend, and there's an existential moment for you when we come face to face with the death of our loved ones and ultimately the death of ourselves. Do you see? He's seen the death of himself. He's seen his own future in that skull. And he says, alas, poor Yorick, I knew him, Horatio, a fellow of infinite jest. There's the fun. Life was full of fun. Now, just because life ends in this, does that mean you abandon the fun? That's the existential solution. He was a man of most excellent fancy. He hath borne me on his back 1,000 times. So very, very fond memories of this, of the clown, the court jester. And now how abhorred in my imagination it is, do you see? So there's the existential angst, that awareness of our ultimate reality. So here's the question about Shakespeare. Is he a Christian or is he an atheist? If confidence in God is solid, if Shakespeare was a Christian, a proper Christian thinker, why would he experience any of this horror, do you see? That's an open question. Here he is again, another existential question. He's talking to Horatio, and he's imagining what happens to all of us. All of our noble struggles end up in dust. All of these struggles, the great Alexander the Great, the conqueror of the world, the Napoleon of the world in the Greco-Roman times, in the Greek Macedonian times, even an emperor of the world is still fighting a Sisyphean fight that is ultimately pointless, is what he says here. Listen, to what base uses we may return, to what absolute, fundamental crappy bases we may return, Horatio. Why may not imagination trace the noble dust of Alexander and find it stopping the bunghole of a beer barrel? The bunghole is the cork that's made up of clay, and you stick it in a beer barrel. Well, the dust from Alexander, that great, noble, ultimate hero, he could be that kind of dust. Now, the solution to that kind of anxiety, that solution to that shock and horror of the reality of our human condition, our thrownness condition, thrown into this Sisyphean struggle, is avoidance the answer to that? Horatio chooses avoidance. He says, "'Twere to consider too curiously to consider so." Don't think about it, man. Hamlet can't do that. His sensitive nature, his intellectual nature, forces him to think about it. Now, that's what I mean when the existentialists say that there's no such thing as human nature, that we are 100% a blank slate and we create ourselves. I think that's garbage. It's absolutely garbage. Here's not a blank slate here. Horatio is the kind of guy that can say, yes, that may be true, but I'm having a good time in my life, and I'm not going to think about it. I'm going to live my life, which is a healthy attitude. Hamlet, no, he's that sensitive thinker. He's got a nature in him that forces him to think in these regards, and he can't not think about it. Okay, so there's all the sad stuff out of the way, and I hope I've kind of softened the blow a little bit by suggesting some of the solutions that the existentialists have found. One of the solutions is the absurd, because the comedy. Comedy is really, really funny, and if the world is absurd, then you might as well laugh at it. So let's look at that now. Waiting for Godot, the play we've been talking about, was part of a movement in the early to mid 20th century of the theater of the absurd, and their principle, their guiding principle, their manifesto, I suppose, claimed that there is no meaning in the universe, and therefore there's no meaning to anything that we say or do. Rational thought is absolutely impossible. So the theater of the absurd strives to express the senselessness of the human condition and the inadequacy of rational thinking, the inadequacy of a rational approach by the open abandonment of rational devices and discursive thought. And so what you see in the theater of the absurd, and even in that play, Waiting for Godot, they talk nonsense. They talk these random non sequiturs, which means that one idea doesn't follow naturally to the other idea. Nonsense being spewed meaningfully, if that paradox holds. And one of the expressions of that sense of senselessness is the Marx Brothers. If you've ever watched the Marx Brothers movies, you know what I'm talking about. It's absolute nonsense. There are non sequiturs, puns, and chaos. A pun is a destabilizing device, because what you're saying when you use a pun, what you're saying is that word is meaningless. It's not grounded in anything. Do you see what I'm saying? It could mean this, or it could mean this. And so humor works in that, with that sense of groundlessness. And so you get that sense of the absurd use of language. If the universe is absurd, then there's no rationality to the universe. Then everything that we try to produce is a Sisyphean effort of pointlessness. All of our words, all of what I'm saying now, the argumentation that I'm saying now is all absolutely pointless, which is not really true, because I'm doing this and you're listening to this. Do you see what I'm saying? So in one regard, they're just kind of talking out of their ears, but there's an element of truth to it that we can't ignore either. So this is from A Night at the Opera, and you listen to this absolute nonsense is almost identical. It could have been written by Shakespeare here. Shakespeare does the same thing with Polonius and Hamlet. Hamlet's an existential, absurd comedy, a theater of the absurd kind of guy. So Driftwood here says, all right, I'll read this contract to you. Can you hear? I haven't heard anything yet. You say anything? Well, I haven't said anything worth hearing. Oh, that's why I didn't hear anything. Well, that's why I didn't say anything. Now, they do a much, much better job of it. Go watch the Marx Brothers. The first 4 or 5 Marx Brothers movies are masterpieces. And the theater of the absurd guys like Beckett and Ionesco and many others, they love the Marx Brothers. The Marx Brothers were a popularized version of a lot of what they were exploring in a very darker and funnier way as well. It's a more serious way. So here's Polonius and Hamlet. What do you read, my lord, says Polonius. Words, words, words. What is the matter, my lord? Between who? I mean the matter that you read, my lord. So do you see what's happening? It's right out of the Marx Brothers. Words are meaningless. What do you read? Well, Hamlet deliberately misinterprets the meaning of this. Polonius means, of course, what is the content? What are the ideas that you're reading, DC? What's the story that you're reading, if it's a story? But he deliberately misinterprets it, and he's not wrong. Yeah, I am. I'm reading words. There's that pun. There's that non sequitur, that nonsense response, this lack of rational discourse, an abandonment of rational devices and discursive thought. That's what Hamlet's abandoning here, in the same way that the Marx Brothers were. Again, what is the matter? He takes that word and he puns on it, and he destabilizes it. He removes it from all context and from all meaning, and he's not wrong. What's the matter between who? What's the problem between who? The matter that you read. He has to correct him, DC. And he says, slander, sir. I'm reading slanders. For the satirical rogue here says here that old men have gray beards. So he's mocking Polonius's gray beard. For yourself, sir, you, sir, shall grow old as I am. Hamlet's younger than Polonius. If, like a crab, you could go backwards. So there's that nonsense. He's just toying with images, toying with ideas, with no meaning whatsoever. It continues here. There's a great picture from the David Tennant version as well. Theater of the absurd. Here he is playing with words. Words are removed from all potential meaning. Words, like life, lose all meaning. Rational discourse is impossible. Humor is used to destabilize. It unmoors reason, DC. And that's where we find that theater of the absurd in Hamlet, which was written 300 years before the theater of the absurd was actually quote unquote invented. Same thing here. He goes on. He's mocking Ophelia. His nervous system is all jacked up, and he's having fun, and he's riffing like the Marx Brothers. Marx Brothers are full of this kind of chaos, this riffing on puns and humor and situational humor. DC. And so he says to Ophelia, he says, "Did you think I meant country matters?" And that's a sexual innuendo here to the female sexual organ. And Ophelia says, "I think nothing, my lord." That's a fair thought to lie between a maiden's legs. And he's destabilizing the word nothing. That was an old slang for the female sexual organ as well. So again, this destabilization of language. What is, my lord? What's a fair thought to lie between a maiden's legs? Nothing. You are merry, my lord. Who I? I, my lord. Oh God, you're only jig maker. What should a man do but be merry? So humor, the only rational response to an irrational universe? I think that's one answer to it. It is. It's funny, and it's fun to be alive, and it's fun to laugh at this stuff. And I think that's one of the reasons why, Samuel Beckett didn't commit suicide, because he was having a lot of fun. I think he really, really was, DC. Now, very, very interestingly, in this film version, I think it's 2009 with David Tennant as Hamlet, he actually, when he says, "Oh God, you're only jig maker," he actually performs a famous dance, a really funny, goofy dance that Groucho Marx does in one of the films. I think it was Captain Spaulding, one of the films. So there's the director of this 2009 version is paying homage to the existential theater of the absurd that the Marx Brothers were a popularized version of. Very, very interesting stuff. Here he is again, talking to Claudius says, "Now Hamlet, where is Polonius? At supper. At supper where, DC?" And we can see where the joke is going already. He says, he's not at supper where he eats, but where he is eaten. Again, a destabilization of the meaning of supper. It can mean anything you want it to mean, depending on the circumstances. Now here we see, it's very, very funny, but absurdist humor is double-edged, and there's nothing more double-edged than Waiting for Godot. It's hilarious. We're sitting there, we're laughing. At the same time, we're horrified that we're laughing, DC. That's how powerful humor can be in this context. So he says, Polonius is not where he eats, but he's where he's being eaten. A certain convocation of politic worms are even at him. Your worm is your only emperor for diet. Now, these are all political metaphors. These are all political ideas, and so he's punning on the fact that Polonius was a statesman, and Claudius is a statesman, and he's making fun of the high and the low. Yeah, you might be a statesman, but you're going to be dust, plugging a beer barrel as a bunghole, do you see? So he's making fun of that. He's mocking his betters. We fat all creatures else to fat us, and we fat ourselves for maggots. Yeah, we kind of do, and it's funny the way he's riffing here, but at the same time it hits right home. So your fat king and your lean beggar is but variable service, 2 dishes, but to 1 table. That's the end. Well, there it is. That's the end. That's an existential statement. There is no end but that. Bunghole, dust, worm's meat. Do you see? There's a meaninglessness there. So again, we can ask the question rightly of Shakespeare, where is God in this? Are you an atheist, Mr. Shakespeare? Are you? And he may have been. Okay, so I tried to soften the blow and to point out the humor and the life positivity that can emerge from an existential existence. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. We have to, because if you don't find a point in living, then you are at risk of becoming a nihilist, and there ain't nothing good about being a nihilist. Okay, so that was Existentialism, Thrownness, Alienation, Absurdity, Nihilism, and Radical Freedom. I hope you found these videos useful, and if you did, please like and subscribe, and come back for my next video. We'll talk about the Dark Triad. I hope you found these videos useful, and if you did, please like and subscribe, and pick up a copy of your PDFs if you need them. Thanks for watching.